Hello and welcome to County Board Wrap Up, our deep dive into the big issues from this month's County Board meeting. I'm your host, Kara O'Donnell, and today we're chatting with, as always, County Board Chair Matt DeFerranti, as well as Board Member Libby Garvey. Thank you both for joining us today. Now let's get right to the big issue with no delay, of course, the adoption of the fiscal year 2022 budget. Now, in approving the budget, the board voted to keep the tax rate at its same level, which has raised a few questions, especially as some property assessments have increased. What was the board's rationale in maintaining the current tax rate, keeping it flat? Matt, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Kara. I think we recognize that there have been a much greater need for services because of COVID. And so the original budget had frozen 56 positions. And in part due to the federal legislation, the American Rescue Plan, we had resources to provide more on some of our key issues. And so that really was critical as we were making the decisions on a $1.4 billion budget, but aware that there's still, folks, a stepped up level of need in housing and our small businesses and on a number of our services. Our Department of Human Services has worked so hard this year. So that's what led us to keep that rate flat. And we're mindful that may mean small increases for some property owners, but we also know that Arlington residents want good housing services, good investments in COVID response. We took $17.5 million and put it into a COVID response contingency that really keeps going on a sort of foundational part of this board's work, which is eviction prevention. We are working to keep everyone in their home during this very difficult time because we're coming out of high levels of infection over the next 3, 5, 7 weeks. I think we're going to be in more and more vaccines, but we still have those COVID budget needs that we have to address on housing, on PPE, on contact tracing in some cases. There's a lot of needs, and that's what led us to say, let's keep the rate flat and invest in our community to bridge from the pandemic and the stability we are working to bring to our community towards the recovery that is so exciting and we're all looking forward to. So I'll just add a little on housing and then I'll pass to you, Libby. We have a lot in this budget, but on housing, I mentioned eviction prevention. We also are investing quite a bit in the housing grants program that serves some of our neediest residents, really mostly those who earn less than $35,000 a year for a household of 3. So we added flexibility to the housing grant program. We slightly decreased the amount from 40% to 30% that households in that program need to contribute because we recognize that there's so much need at this time. So that's housing, and I know there's a number of other items. I mentioned small business, and I know economic recovery is important to you, Libby, and really all of us.
Oh, absolutely. You know, this budget, I think more than most, and I think our residents understood this almost more than most times. It's so clear we have so much increased need, which Matt, you talked about a lot with the housing and everything. And then, but some people are really struggling because they've lost jobs. And so in some ways it's harder for people to pay the taxes. We are lucky here in that a lot of people in Arlington have jobs that can be done virtually. And that has really helped a certain amount. And I think all of us struggled a little bit wanting to lower the tax rate, knowing that some people were having a really hard time, but yet realizing that there are other folks who it was really kind of existential. They needed housing and they needed food. So we do have, which we talked about a lot the last budget cycle that we went through, which was that we have these programs to help people if they are having trouble paying their taxes, and you can talk to the treasurer so that, you know, kind of where we came down was we got to help people that really need help. And if folks are having trouble with their taxes, there are some programs, and anybody listening who's, you know, having difficulty paying the taxes should let us know. And then Matt, as you mentioned, yeah, economic recovery for our small businesses. I mean, those are the folks that are really struggling and having a hard hard time. We did set aside some more funding for the grant program, which we did last year. That was like a complete quick pivot to help our small businesses. And what we heard from small businesses was that actually loans, because of where they're at and the troubles they're having, you've got a small business, a loan is not that great because they just can't take on that much debt because they don't think they may never be able to pay it back. And actually a grant program to help get them through is what helps. And obviously, Matt, as you mentioned, the American Rescue Act has really helped a lot in that area. So that's another one. And then of course, we had some other big issues that we're talking about too. So I'm sure, Kara, you've got some questions about those too.
Sure. Well, Libby, you touched on the economic recovery angle with, of course, the new allocation for our small business community. But let's talk about a little more of the items that are included under that American Rescue Plan. For those who aren't aware, that is the federal relief plan. And it's really giving the county a chance to expand its horizons a little bit and look at some of the things we really need to do to move into the future. As Matt, as you said, kind of create that bridge into an era of recovery. One thing that was a big part of that is the investments made for climate change. Libby, do you want to give us an update on that?
Sure, we put a lot. I think everybody knows climate change is an issue. We still remember that storm of July 19, I think it was. So we all feel the need to kind of help the globe and help ourselves locally. So on the larger kind of picture, we put in some more money, actually, which the American Rescue Act helped. So with 13 charging stations for electric vehicles, just to get more. I think we don't see that many electric vehicles, but we all kind of know they're coming, and I think they're going to come fast, and we've got to be able to charge them. And that's just another way to kind of help. It's a kind of a real chicken and egg issue with electric vehicles. You can't get the vehicles if you can't charge, but you don't want to charge if you haven't got the vehicles. So we're kind of starting it up with jump starting it with no pun intended with the charging. And then of course we also put in a little extra money to kind of put in some extra funds to buy more electric vehicles for our own fleet, which I think is important. And we've heard from particularly our C2E2 Commission that a real desire to make sure we have a whole of government approach, which I think we're working on, but we kind of made that explicit. And directed the manager to sort of go into a whole of government approach to looking at climate change and sustainability, because it's a full court press. Everybody is kind of on board then. And we did increase a dedicated stormwater tax, which we hadn't done in a long time, to help handle stormwater. So I don't know, over to you, Matt. I think there's a lot of stuff we've been doing with stormwater, both, currently and moving forward. And this budget just kind of helped continue the foundation to keep that work moving forward.
Yes, it sure did. And I think given the storm of July 2019, we knew this was a priority. We've done some bond funding, but the investment in the slight increase for the first time in a long time in the stormwater rate is part of addressing this need that really has come up in part because of climate change, but also because of decisions made sort of 50 years ago. But we
actually, I think 80 years ago.
Yeah. So we had investment also in the police practices group. We put over about 1.5 million in additional funding there. We also are going to hire an auditor monitor as part of our implementation of the suggestions and recommendations that our police practices group did. There's 6 unsworn officers for parking enforcement, traffic direction, and safety, which is an initiative that the manager and I think all of us are very appreciative of. I just think it's important to kind of close with context on our county employees. We have invested there, and if you think about it, there's Department of Parks and Recreation individuals who have been taking phone calls for months now about COVID. Everybody has been asked to continue to do what's necessary for the current work, but also switch and change and do additional duties as assigned, as the saying goes. And that has really strained our workforce, and our public health, our public safety have been asked to do so much. So we increased by 1%. We were able to do that for salaries over the next year. That's fiscally responsible, but we also had one-time funding that we were able to invest, and that led to a one-time net bonus of $900, which, if you think about everything our employees have been doing, we feel and felt was the right approach. Lastly, there's for equity, we increased slightly from $15 to $17 per hour. Those in the salaries for those at the bottom area of our compensation. So it's a budget that includes investments in equity. It's a budget that is fiscally wise, given we all may want to be done with COVID, but there's economic impacts that are still with us. And so we have to bridge to that next stage. So that's where we are.
Yeah.
And to kind of wrap up there, well, I mean, as we kind of move slowly out of the emergency mode generated by the pandemic, we all maybe remember last year, the manager had to come back several times because there were so many unexpected expenses, or more like lack of revenue coming in. Do we expect some of the same kinds of budget modifications that we experienced last year, or will we start to see things more normal, so to speak?
Normal, with fingers crossed, I think. But you know, I was really struck, you know, looking at this and listening to you, Matt, as we're having this discussion. This budget, more than most, to me, just shows the big issues, show the complexity of local government and what we're dealing with. So you've got police practices group, and that's really a cultural change that we're working on. And not that, I mean, I think our police are very good, very professional, and we're far down the road to moving into 21st century policing, which, you know, we don't need to have police for traffic stops. We need to have a mental health crisis unit. You know, we're really moving into that area. We had a good foundation to do it, but that's really a cultural shift. And then you've got real literal nuts and bolts when you're talking about stormwater, because, you know, it's not only trees and things that are important, it's the pipes, it's the cisterns that we have to build to hold and retain the water. So it's a really major a major combination of both cultural shifts that we're going through and physical shifts. And this budget kind of carries it all. And our employees are the ones who have to make it happen. And then, Matt, as you talked about, I mean, it's just been incredible the way they have been changing and adapting. And we had hoped to do more for our employees this time, and hopefully more going forward. But yeah, Cara, hopefully we're going to get to a nice, steady, even kind of time next time. But these last 2 budget years have been pretty amazing. I've been doing a lot of budgets, I think 24 or 5 of them. It's never been like this before.
I was going to say, it's an era I think we will all be grateful to move out of in the coming months.
Yeah.
So,
and hopefully this sets a foundation for being at a better place when we come out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a quick break. Of course, there are quite a few other issues that came before the board this month. We'll take a look at some of those, as well as get an update on COVID vaccinations when we come right back. Welcome back to County Board Wrap Up, our deeper dive into the issues from this month's County Board meeting, as well as the other hot topics facing the board. Now, before we get to some of the other board meeting actions, we wanted to check in on the pandemic and specifically the COVID vaccine rollout here in Arlington. Now, Arlington has entered phase 2 of eligibility, as has the rest of Virginia, which means anyone 16 and up who wants a vaccine is eligible to receive one. Matt, let's start with you. Can you give us a status update as to where we are with that vaccine rollout here in Arlington?
Sure, happy to. We have been continuing to invest in our COVID response. We talked a little bit about the budget. Well, the budget reflects our work, and some numbers for you. Our test positivity rate is about 3%. Which is well below the 5% that is concerning to our Director of Public Health and experts across the state and the nation. We have been seeing many days over the last 7 where we have had less than 20 cases. These are great steps, but we're not done. We have over 40% of Arlingtonians, significantly over 40% of Arlingtonians have been vaccinated with 1 dose. And there's more to do on that, but the vaccines are coming. But we should remember that this disease is still can be deadly, and we have to take it very seriously and continue to wear a mask and social distance, because we went 2 weeks without any fatalities, and then just yesterday we had one. And in Arlington, we want to make sure we keep everybody healthy. And so that's like a status update. We're making progress, but we're not there yet. One challenge that I think those who are watching will want to know is we've moved into phase 2. Everyone 16 and above is eligible. We have about 30,000 people on that list, and we sent out about 8,500 invitations late last week on this. And so we're working through phase 2, but there's more to do. We're also still helping those in phase 1A, 1B, and 1C with a priority. Once they register, we're getting to them quickly. So we hope that people will pre-register at Vaccinate Virginia. We know we have more to do, and we're all thinking about how we can make sure everyone gets vaccinated. And I know at this stage we've started that process for Libby and I. Libby?
Yeah, sure. Now, I think, we are, because I think people sometimes do wonder, well, how's the board? And actually, we've been getting vaccinated just like everybody else. So I got to go first because I'm over 65. So I got my invitation, but I signed up on the Virginia site or the Arlington site, and then found out that I got shifted. And I was one of those people that made the same mistake of I registered then twice because it wasn't clear to me what I was supposed to do. But anyway, and had, mild reactions, but really very, very, very few. And Matt, I think you're vaccinated now, or at least, well on the way. And I think the point is everybody needs to get vaccinated. Please, if you're, eligible and there's not any, outstanding reason you shouldn't be, please get vaccinated. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for people. And in fact, I don't know, Matt, if you want to talk a little bit about the Arlington Free Clinic and the pop-ups that we're doing and all of the different ways we're trying to particularly target the most vulnerable. I thought one of the sort of strokes of genius was when the manager said, let's change our complete count committee for the census, which was trying to reach into all kinds of places where it's hard to reach folks with information that we send out, often because of languages or lack of technology or whatever. And we just morphed that to a complete vaccination committee, again, trying to get everybody vaccinated. And I think that's been a great effort.
Yeah, there's been a lot of different ways. There's working with neighborhood health. We provided vaccines in Green Valley through Macedonia Baptist Church by appointment. We also have a group of about 8 Latina leaders who has pre-registered over 2,000 people, some on the west end of Columbia Pike, where we have a greater concentration of poverty and a greater concentration of cases within the pandemic here in Arlington. So we're continuing to work on that. And Johnson & Johnson, that pause slowed us some. And we have this situation where Northern Virginia and Arlington, almost everyone wants the vaccine, but there are parts of the rest of the state that haven't had quite as quick an uptake. And so our supply is still not where we would love it to be, but people are seeing different ways. And if you go to this vaccine.virginia.gov, you will see that there is also Vaccine Finder, and as well as the works we are taking, the steps we are taking to equitably distribute the vaccine to those most in need and most at risk. So there's hope here. It's not as fast as we would like, but I've gotten just yesterday, got my second dose, did it in order, and not ahead of anything. So we want everybody to get vaccinated. And there's some great videos in Spanish, I believe Tagalog,
Amharic.
Yes, Amharic, and they're short, and those are available via our website, and we'll put those in this video for you to see. So yeah. Progress and more to come, Kara.
And I might just add one thing before we move on, Matt, that and Cara, that we're not the only game in town, and we know that. So the federal government is distributing to pharmacies and to grocery stores, and people sometimes can go. I was talking to somebody yesterday who went down to DC because she found out there was something open. She's in the younger category. So we're not saying you have to get it from Arlington County. The vaccine you can get now is the best vaccine. Get it when you can get vaccinated. And that Vaccine Finder is really a good site to use. But we are doing our best, and I think we're doing pretty well. We're continuing to move forward. But everybody, just the real message is get vaccinated. Just
Absolutely.
get vaccinated.
And one thing to keep in mind, and Libby, you just were touching on that, is people have more than one avenue in which to receive the vaccine. So definitely make sure you're pre-registered with that Vaccinate Virginia site. But then you can also take a look at Vaccine Finder and find the pharmacies or the other kind of pop-up locations that are offering those vaccines. And always the underlying message of the best vaccine is the one that's available to you, right? And Matt, this might be a question for you, and it's one I know we've seen a lot, is when can we expect? Do we have a timeline on when anyone who wants a vaccine here in Arlington will have one?
Well, it's a great question, not an easy one. Arlington residents being Arlington residents, you may have gone to the New York Times has a date when we would get to 70% nationally. I personally think that we're going to, it might take a month or a month and a half for everyone to get that first dose in Arlington, but I think it could be shorter. Some of it depends on the pause with Johnson & Johnson. But I think give us a month, and that doesn't mean it's not really hard. I got an email just this morning from a resident who is eager to get that second dose. And we don't send the email invitation on the second dose until it's close to the time that's on your vaccine card when you get the first dose. So I'd say month and a half, but I'm trying to be conservative, frankly, not overpromise. We are working flat out, and Libby's right. There are many different ways to get a vaccine, but the county board, the county manager, and our public health leaders, all of us feel responsible to get you as many doses and get you vaccinated as soon as possible, because we know it makes a real difference.
Absolutely.
Some of those Vaccine Finder sites too, quick funny story, because someone said she was searching, thought she could get one at Dulles Airport and was all set to go and looked around. And I think there's apparently a Dulles Airport or something similarly named in Jakarta or somewhere in Asia. And then she got then she continued more, and they were going to offer her she could get a vaccine that day in Islamabad. And so just be careful when you go online and realize it's quite a large, apparently, depending on what site you're looking at. So, but we're getting there, and I think you're right, Matt, to caution and be a little bit, because so much of it is out of our control. When we get the vaccines, we put them in people's arms, but we're not making the vaccines ourselves. So.
Well, and as both of you mentioned, both during our budget segment, and of course, it has a lot to do with the pandemic effects here in Arlington, and that's food security. Now, this issue has been made even more prominent this past year because of the pandemic, and we have some interesting news to share with the formation of a new food security task force. Matt, I know this issue is one that is very near and dear to your heart, so we're going to kick it off with you. Tell us a little bit about this.
Well, Arlington, we have so many resources in terms of being a compassionate community, in terms of a highly educated community, and people want to help and address our challenges. I like to think of it that if any community can address hunger, Arlington can. And so we've seen a significant increase in the number of households that are food insecure, as defined by Feeding America and the national leaders in this area. And it jumped 23% at AFAC to more than 3,500 households. We had hunger in Arlington before this, but this task force is going to try and work in a systemic way on the supports that we have churches and nonprofits that have been providing hunger relief for over a year, and PTAs, and we really need to find how can we be systemic in addressing food insecurity and hunger. And that's a step that we're going to take over the coming days in setting up a task force on this. It will be time limited, 12 to 18 months. And this is, other localities also have entities that work on food and hunger response. But we need to engage in a more systemic way on this issue. And over the course of those 12 to 18 months, we have a group of about 25 that's going to work together to develop a plan to end hunger in Arlington. And that will be hard, but we ended veterans homelessness, and this is a challenge that we need to take on. I can tell you, I'm really thrilled. This is a passion of mine, but really all of us on the board care deeply about this. And I wanted to, Libby, I know you're involved in a couple of different ways, and wanted to send it over to you. I'm really pleased this is a shared board priority.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's one really for the community. I think the pandemic has made it so clear that there are people who are food insecure, even here. And I'm really pleased about this task force that's getting set up. And it's going to be headed up by our new food security coordinator, Stephanie Hopkins. And that's something that a lot of localities have had, is kind of a more an organized set person office that's kind of handling hunger. And now we've got that too, which I think is really going to be a good thing. With the Council of Governments, I've been working several years ago. We started a group called Farm, and that's actually just looking at agriculture in the region and supplying our own food needs, which I got into originally because I realized with climate change, and as I say, most of our fruits and vegetables come from Florida, which is, eventually going underwater, most likely, much of it, and California, which seems to catch on fire very frequently. And that, with both of those two states, really so threatened by climate change, it's pretty clear to me that, and has been for a long time, that we're going to need to do more here locally. And there are a lot of efforts. And then the pandemic hit, and all the supply chains started to get disrupted. There are some real challenges when your food is coming from 1,000 or 2,000 miles away. So I think we're becoming more resilient as a region that way, and I'm very pleased that that's the case. I think, Matt, I was just listening to, as you're listing, it's amazing. You've got the PTAs, right, and the nonprofits and the churches and all of these groups. It just shows how very unorganized we are as a nation with our safety net for food. And I'm hoping that one of the good things to come out of the pandemic is realizing that, during the pandemic, we realized people needed to eat and we needed to feed them. And moving forward, that we don't, like, suddenly now the pandemic's over, we don't worry about people eating anymore. One of the Council of Governments organizations I'm on, we were talking about sending a letter to the Congress, because encouraging them to keep feeding children, in schools. And this business about schools where you've got hungry children and they haven't paid their lunch fee and they don't get fed is just, as I said, what's the question about feeding hungry children? If a child's hungry, feed the child. And I think we're moving to that. It's such common sense, and it seems to have taken a pandemic to kind of hit us over the head as a nation that is common sense, and let's just do it. I'm hoping that will stick. So, and again, recognize, Matt, you've been talking about this for a long time. So the pandemic really revealed what an issue it is.
Yeah, and one partner that we have in this effort is Arlington Public Schools, and that's another that we haven't mentioned, but we're working together, and we're going to develop a plan for addressing this sustainability to do so. And this is an important time to recognize just what you said, Libby, that we need an organized, more systemic effort on even in Arlington with our strong safety net. We still need a more organized way to approach this. So we're both thrilled, and the whole board. So.
And of course, we do have quite a few other topics of decisions made by the board at its April meeting. We're going to talk housing, the arts, and more when we come right back. Welcome back to County Board Wrap Up, where we're taking a closer look at some of the decisions from this month's board meeting. I'm Kara O'Donnell, and we're talking today with Board Chair Matt DiFerranti, as well as Board Member Libby Garvey. Now, flexible zoning heights was a big topic at this month's board meeting, specifically when it comes to affordable housing. Tell me about the decision that was made that allowed for a little bit more flexibility there?
Sure. So in 2019, we adopted a zoning position that we basically just gave the board back a little more flexibility in 3 specific zoning categories across the county. And mostly they're really focused in our corridors, our Roslyn, Ballston, and our Columbia Pike, and some extent our Crystal City corridor. Those, we just allowed a little more flexibility for the board to consider projects in 3 multifamily districts. And it's part of, there would need to be specific findings, and it would need to be significant a number of affordable housing in the proposed project, and findings by the board that there was an appropriate transition from the projects to the surrounding neighborhood. So we don't anticipate that this provision will be governing for very long, and there are some planning processes that we explicitly indicated we want to see the progress on those. For example, the currently Lee Highway planning process is going to be very relevant to any projects that might come forward. This is a tool that helps with what are called tax credit projects and applications, and is a way to continue our effort to address affordable housing. And so that's basically what it was. There was some discussion and concern, but I really feel that we are able to address those concerns. No projects were approved through this change. We simply gave the board the discretion under these 3 districts in a structured way to do this. So we had significant discussion last month on it, some discussion as well this month. The board wanted to be thorough, and we were. And so this is a step forward, as I see it, to continue providing adequate affordable housing supply at all levels. So we were united on this piece of it, and I know that we also took a number of other steps in the budget on affordable housing, but this is one on land use for affordable housing that we thought was targeted, really essentially time limited, and a step forward.
I think it's important to note
so.
This
it really is a limited tool. Yeah, as Matt said, it's a limited tool, and I know our residents don't always feel that way, but because the board, it's very limited, and the board's the one who makes the decision. It didn't say we had to decide, and all it was trying to do was allow some flexibility so they get, a developer could build more units, which sometimes just allows that project to pencil out so they can actually build it and provide more housing. And I don't think this board is about to approve a project that doesn't, isn't appropriate and doesn't fit somewhere. But I understand people getting nervous, and I think we made a specific mention, I think, of the Lee Highway Alliance, that it wasn't going to, supersede that or the Columbia Pike area plan and all of that. So I'm pretty comfortable with it. But it's interesting because it really did just take us back to 2019. But people get worried every time we're voting on something. So.
And I think, it is important to note that this just allows for that flexibility for these proposals to come in front of you. It would still go through the site review process. It would still go through the community engagement process. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of scenario.
Right.
Well, speaking of housing, the board did also approve a measure that we're seeing a little more often here in Arlington, and that's the trend towards temporarily converting housing supply into hotel units, particularly in brand new construction. Let's talk a little bit about this proposal from the Highlands project in Roslyn.
Yeah, thank you. So the Highlands project came forward, and they were trying something, as you said, this is something we've started doing, and it works pretty well. It started before the pandemic. And the situation being that when a developer is building a building for residences and they're going to be purchased, it's hard to fill up that building right away. And that's expensive for the developer. And it also is it actually isn't good for anybody to have an empty building. So if you move it to hotel space to start out so that so temporarily, some of those units are hotel spaces, it just allows the building to be used and allows the developer a little more financial wiggle room as they fill it up. And it's traditionally done, traditionally, actually, as you say, it's new. I don't know if it's quite a tradition yet, but usually a couple of years. And what happened with the Highlands project is they came forward, the developer actually asked for 7 years to do the hotel use,
Right.
not the whole thing, but part of it as hotel use. And they were really, I think, are planning to try kind of a new model. And I was comfortable with that. Our staff looked at it and said, I think 5 years for right now. Let's not give 7 years, seems too long. And I was quite comfortable with that. And it turns out the developer was all right with it. But our planning commission, and I'll let Matt talk a little bit more to this, because this was a split vote. We don't always have split votes, but this was a 3-2. So the two of us that thought we ought to do it at least for 5 years, I think we're thinking it would be a good kind of a pilot project or an experiment, because it was sort of a new approach. I know some folks were worried about all of the hotels that are going empty now. And why are we building? Why would we want more hotel rooms? Which I understand. But when you listen to them, the developer talk, these rooms wouldn't come online for several more years. And they're actually being designed kind of to pandemic specifications, if you will. There's a sense that people with hotels are going to want a different kind of hotel experience going forward to feel secure during a pandemic or whatever else. So it's a ways out. I don't think it would affect the existing hotel stock that we've got now, which some of which is going to just probably disappear. So we could end up with actually, now we have a glut of hotel rooms. We could end up with not enough hotel rooms if everything really picks up and we've lost a lot of hotel rooms. And there's quite a lag time to build more. So with all of that, I was comfortable with the 5 years trying it as a pilot, but my colleagues didn't agree. And maybe this is a good time, Matt, for me to turn it over to you.
I was just going to say, Matt, you were one of those colleagues who didn't agree. So give us your reasoning on going along with the Planning Commission's recommendations.
Well, I think that this is a temporary use, and we had approved the final use here of being apartments. And so, I felt that the developer in this case should come back and actually, if they wanted 7 years, they should come back and actually apply for a different use for some of the Highlands building. These are going to be beautiful and not cheap. They're going to be Class A type accommodations, a little nicer than the average. And so I still feel and felt that the Planning Commission's recommendations of 2 years, we want, the highest end housing has an impact as you go down in terms of cost and amenities in with respect to multifamily housing. So I didn't feel that I wanted to lock in or provide this sort of investment security at this level for 5 years or 7. The Planning Commission's recommendation was for 2 years with an option for 2 additional years. And that is, we just granted the 2 years this time, but I communicated then that my current inclination, if I'm lucky enough to still be on the board, would be to add that 2 years later. And so the distinction between Libby and Christian's position and the three of us who wanted to stick with 2 years wasn't that great, but it is. I do believe that temporary use of some of these new buildings is better than not having that temporary use, and so I think that it's a good road. We will see how this impacts the housing market, and we will see. We very much hope that those building in Arlington will continue to invest here. Our recovery over the coming weeks, months, and years is dependent upon continuing to add housing supply in smart ways that aren't necessarily taking a lot of green space, and we have enough resources to serve those who will come into those new buildings. But if we don't add housing supply, then that'll be a challenge. So that's where I landed, and a little summary of why I went with the Planning Commission's point of view. And I don't know if there are pieces you want to add to that, Libby. We also took some steps with respect to a building in Nelson Street in near Green Valley and Shirlington that I know we want to cover too, but wanted to make sure, even as we came out on different places on this hotel use, I think we had a good discussion that recognized both the need for economic recovery and housing supply.
Well, since Matt, you stole my segue there, that the board did vote to exercise its option to purchase a parcel of land near the existing cultural affairs offices. You said in the just outside Shirlington there, along Nelson Street and Oakland Street with the vision of a future arts and industry district. Let's talk a little bit about this parcel, why the decision was made to purchase this parcel now, and what some of the visioning is for the future.
All right. Yeah, it's actually pretty exciting. It was interesting for me even, sometimes the way we do these virtual meetings, you're in the meeting, you're part of the meeting, but you sometimes observe it too, a little more than I think we do if we're sitting at the dais. And it was clear people kind of got more and more excited as we talked about it. So this is a building we've had an option to purchase for quite some time. And it's an old rundown building, and our plan is not to keep the building. We're going to be taking it down and having some open space. We've got a portable stage that needs a home, and it can be there for performances. The 4 Mile Run area plan, and also our public spaces master plan, and our whole arts and culture strategy. All of these plans kind of fit together for what we're planning to do there. So it's been kind of a vision that we've had for some time. One of the concerns was in this old building, which is sort of crumbling, there are 3 existing businesses that are renting it, and what's going to happen to them? One is AFAC and the Arlington Food Assistance Center, but they're actually just using it temporarily while they build space, so they're planning to move out, and it doesn't. That should work fine with their schedule. One of them is Ben & Jerry's administrative, and I think she's been sort of planning to move anyway. And then the last is the Inner Ear that people were really concerned about. And the gentleman there has been doing this for a long, long time. He's ready to retire, so he sort of said, this is okay. So we're not kicking anybody out. And in fact, with this purchase and the way it's organized, we're actually saving some money with the purchase price. But we are timing it, and we're going to have flexibility to make sure that we don't put anybody out sort of on the street. If particularly the Ben & Jerry's needs to move, we've got some funds there to help her find another spot if she needs to. But the gentleman who does the Inner Ear, he wants to be part of the whole discussion about how we're moving forward. And that's really cool because he's had a career there and done exciting things with the music world. I'll let Matt talk a little more about that. But he wants to be part of the transition to the future, and that's really great. Which signaled to me this is really I think a win-win-win all the way around. So it made a lot of sense, and people are excited about what we could do. So and it can be we'll get started on it fairly soon.
Yeah, I was really excited hearing from our cultural affairs part of Arlington Economic Development about the possibilities for what this space can be. It's so consistent with the plans that we've had for years on related to the arts in that area. And I think you could also tell that all of us were eager to get past Zoom and Microsoft Teams and actually see each other in person. So this is a great opportunity and a great way that we can fulfill our plans and do so in a smart way. And it just so happened that I was volunteering with AFAC earlier before the board meeting on that day. And you could see that AFAC is also really pleased to have the space currently to do some construction down there. But this is a good step. And so I think it will be able to use for the arts. There's some other possibilities for in certain instances, we want to make sure that there's sufficient parking for AFAC volunteers. But this is a really good news story that helps us look towards the future. So it's a great project, and was happy to support it.
Yeah, and maybe what I should explain, because I think people listening might not have, I realized I didn't quite get. So we had an option to purchase it, but we were paying rent. We were paying for using the space. So by exercising the option to purchase, we're not paying that rent. So that's why we're saving the money that we're saving. But we also, with this agreement, are extending the time for closing which as late as possible, as maybe as late as February of 2022, which allows the current tenants to find other things to do, to move out, which they're planning to do anyway, and gives us a lot of lead time to kind of get ready. But once that happens, we'll take that building down and get going with some exciting programming, I think.
I think it'll be very exciting to see what ends up, from all the visions of this future arts and industry district, some of the plans that they have for this space. It was really intriguing to see.
Yeah, well, you've got Jenny Dean Park coming online, and you've got the little footbridge over to Shirlington, and it's right there in Green Valley. It's going to be great. And
it really is.
It isn't kind of in my neighborhood. I'm excited to see it happening.
All right. Well, with that will bring us to the end of another County Board wrap up. Matt and Libby, as always, thank you both for your insight here today. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Remember, you can always find out about these topics and more just by visiting the County Board website at arlingtonva.us and just search County Board. We hope that you'll join us again next month for the very latest on these important board actions and more. We'll see you then.